India has over 65 million free-ranging dogs. While dogs are man's best friend, they are a major threat to wildlife. On this episode of the Think Wildlife podcast, we talk about the free-ranging dog menace with Chandrima Home. Chandrima has done extensive research on the impacts of free-ranging dogs on Indian wildlife, especially in the Himalayas. We also discuss about the difference between feral and free-ranging dogs and why the former is an inaccurate term. Tune in to listen more. So, welcome, Chandrima, to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on to talk about the issue of feral dogs.
Thank you, Anish. Thanks a lot.
So, what got you interested in studying wild canids?
I think going back to studying canids actually started as a part of my master's dissertation. So I was a master's student at Wildlife Institute of India, and as a part of my master's research, I worked on the Indian foxes, which is a canid species endemic to India. And it is through this work that I was very fascinated with canids as a group and with the species as well, because I think there were a lot of interesting insights that came out through this research, and which kind of led me to work further on canids later on. And I was always interested in understanding canids and foxes and the smaller carnivores. Something that's really got me interested through my master's research were actually smaller carnivores. I ended up looking at the domestic dogs in a very different frame altogether, but my interest started specifically when I was doing my master's dissertation at WII.
Feral dogs are currently the most abundant terrestrial carnivore in the world. In India itself, there's 30 million feral dogs. What led to such a massive surge in feral dog populations?
So, I would just like to correct some of the terminologies here. I think a lot of people loosely use feral dogs, but there are no true feral dogs per se, except for the New Guinea singing dogs. Um, when you say the word feral, it essentially means that they're completely independent of humans and they completely get all their resources from the wild. Now, in case of domestic dogs, to be very frank, there is no true feral domestic dogs. These a better terminology to use would be free ranging per se. So they are free ranging, and what they differ in is the amount of perhaps the dependence that they have on humans. But even though what you call as feral dogs are actually not feral but free ranging, but they are also in some ways subsidized by humans through the anthropogenic food that is available to them as scavenging material, and at the same time they are also looking out for food in the wildlife. So here I would like to correct that maybe instead of feral, the word free ranging would be a better term to use. And if you look at the population of feral dogs, we are talking about a global population of 1 billion. It is and India has close to about around 60 million, and it is not over 30 million, it is over 60 million. And there was a book that was published by Dr. Matthew Gomper in 2014, and it was a very interesting book that looked at domestic dogs and wildlife conservation. And one of the first chapters of this book actually tried to look at the global dog populations based on human dog ratios across major cities within these countries. And through this book, in some ways, you get an idea about what the actual global picture is. But this was what came out in 2014, and we really don't know what has happened in these 7 years. They are the most widespread terrestrial carnivore across the globe, and it is because of the way they are, in the sense that wherever there will be humans, there will also be dogs. If you look at the growth of dog populations, specifically, I can say for India that there is a huge speculation about how these dog populations increased when the vulture decline took place in the early 2000s actually. Uh, Probably because they kind of took over the scavenging niche. But this is still speculative because there is no hard evidence to say. There are only speculations, there are stories, there are anecdotes. to kind of say that, perhaps dog took over this particular niche. And usually domestic dogs are never a part of any animal study per se when you want to understand their ecology or their population dynamics. So there's no published information about what happened to populations then and what is happening to populations now. It's only in the very recent times that people have probably started looking at domestic dogs and their population dynamics. So there is some literature that is trickling in right now. So, definitely for India, there is a speculation that the vulture decline opened up the scavenging niche for dogs, and also the way the management, in the early 2001, animal birth control became the only form of population control. And I think together it was with this and a lot of other things put together, which kind of compounded this whole thing, which led to the massive increase in dog populations, specifically in India.
So one of your papers published in 2019 in the journal Animal Conservation studied the impacts of free-ranging dogs on Indian wildlife. What were the broad findings from your study?
So, this study was probably one of the first to understand the impacts of dogs on wildlife in a more comprehensive manner. So, before I started my work, I kind of started more on a clean slate with just very few anecdotal information. So, there were pictures that were being reported in various platforms about how dogs were attacking wildlife, but there was no concrete information as to what is the extent of this impact. And I used a combination of online surveys and print media reports to understand this. And I think the study gave really some important insights. So it reported almost close to 80 species in India being attacked by dogs, and almost 31 species were of global conservation importance as per IUCN. A lot of the animals that the dogs were attacking was largely mammals, which belong to the categories of ungulates and carnivores. Nearly more than half of these attacks were carried out by dogs, which were doing these actions in packs, and half of the animals actually died. And a lot of these reports were coming in from protected areas and buffers, which kind of indicated how dogs were actually a very large scale edge effects in many of these areas. So these were some of the key findings that came out of this work actually.
Free-ranging dogs are also a public health hazard. How so?
Yes, they are a very big public health hazard because almost 90% of rabies transmission actually occurs through domestic dogs. But other than rabies, there are also an increasing number of reports that has been coming in for in terms of human deaths by dogs, and I think that is pretty out there in social media and in a lot of newspapers. There are also a lot of attacks in terms of dog bites. There are road calamities. So in a lot of ways, they are a public health hazard as well. So these are the different ways in which dogs can impact humans.
You've also studied a feral dog and human conflict. Could you elaborate about your work in this regard?
So a lot of my work on the free-ranging dogs and the impacts that they had on humans were restricted to the Trans-Himalayas in India. So I looked at the impact of livestock depredation by domestic dogs in the Upper Spiti landscape. So this is in Himachal Pradesh, and it's a cold desert landscape. The human populations is not as dense as you see in many other places. So the human dog ratios are quite different from many other places in India. But even with the number of dogs that are there, the impacts have been quite severe. So so a lot of my work actually tried to investigate how and why domestic dogs, kill livestock. And there were some interesting insights from that study as well. Along with that, what we also wanted to understand through this work was the fact that the dogs were, domestic dog is always regarded as a pet, as an animal which is very close to humans. But here they were in this landscape actually going out and hunting people's livestock. So it was a very different situation, and I wanted to understand how people viewed domestic dogs, especially in this backdrop where the dogs were actually leading to a lot of economic losses for them. So, and also we wanted to look at how, over a period of time, with the fact that the dogs have been operating in the landscape and killing livestock, how has this led to changes in the agropastoral communities and their way of life, and how are things changing, and what probably would they kind of infer in the next the decade to come. So these were some of the areas that I was investigating as a part of my PhD, and there were many insights that came out of it, especially the kind of economic losses that the people faced because of dogs were really, really high and much higher than wild carnivores themselves. And but despite having such high economic losses, people still had very neutral attitudes towards dogs. And we also saw a pattern in how certain changes were taking place in the agropastoralist scape, where there was a massive reduction in the small-bodied livestock over a period of time, and a lot of it was attributed to actually domestic dogs killing livestock.
Recently, genetic evidence has been found in Pune of wolf and dog hybridizations. Why is this such a big concern?
Yeah, this is the first time there is scientific, I mean, actually, the wolf dog hybridization for the Indian wolf with the dog was reported for the first time in Pune. But when I was working in Spiti, there was a group in WII which reported a female wolf mating with a dog, and there was photographic evidence of wolf dog hybridization as well. It didn't materialize probably because the female wolf was a loner and it perhaps died later on. But this is of concern because in some ways it dilutes the genetic makeup of wolves themselves. Like, I mean, we all do know that dogs have evolved from wolves, but then when you look into hybridizations, the actual wild animal which is interacting with the domestic species, the genetic, there is a loss of, I don't know how to put it, but in general, there is a dilution of the genetic makeup of these species. So technically, at some point, if there is too much of hybridization, you will see certain things genetically falling apart probably, and you'll have these hybrids which are wolf and which are having both wolf and dog, certain dog specific and wolf specific genes. So we will actually be probably giving rise to something very different. So in some ways it does have an impact on the native species themselves, so it is something of concern. But how it will pan out in the longer run is something that one needs to see. I'm sure there would have been cases of dog jackal hybridization, dog jackal hybrids as well, because dog populations are in such huge. I mean, the number of dogs is far more greater than the wild population. So these interactions are bound to happen, and this is the first time that this evidence is coming out, but then it's not that probably it has not been there. It's just that it has been reported and it's out there.
So, how exactly do dogs transmit these diseases from to wild carnivores?
So it also depends on how the virus circulates within the dog populations and around it. So if you look at canine distemper virus per se, other than the juveniles and the young ones, most adults are able to survive CDV. But the thing is that CDV in wild is very debilitating. So there have been populations of foxes, dholes that has probably been wiped out. And because many of these things are not, looked into at the right time, or the analysis or the forensic analysis are not done properly to assess some of these things, we really don't get to know many a times why do these sudden die-offs happen. But in general, the way the virus persists within the environment allows them to get transmitted to the wild canids as well. So although even if dogs survive CDB, especially as adults, most wild animals can't. So
So,
definitely, many of these viruses have very different impacts on wild canids versus domestic canids.
other than CDB, what are some other uh, common diseases which impact wild carnivores, which are transmitted from feral dogs?
So there is also parvovirus, there is adenovirus, there's rabies, and there are a whole lot of others as well. So, and there are also parasites. There are many parasites which can also be transmitted. So I think if we want to look at the disease biology or disease ecology and how that impacts wild canids with domestic dogs, as you know, uh, like the group of animals from which these diseases spread, there are tons of studies and there is lots of literature. So, and it's a different world altogether, and I think somebody who actually works in the realm of disease ecology would be more well equipped to talk about it. And but definitely, if you look at amongst the canine viruses, CDB, parvo, these are the most prevalent forms. And um, the problem is that most wild parvovirus, even if probably I'm not sure about wild animals surviving, but CDB is definitely very debilitating in terms. There have been die-offs of animals because of CDBs.
So, what is being done in India to mitigate the impacts of feral dogs on India's wildlife?
It's a very tough question to ask. And well, um, I mean, a lot of through my work and through my advisors' research as well, Dr. Abitamim Vanak, I think there has been a lot of talk, uh, which kind of builds in the scenario that uh, there are lots of things that needs to be done for free-ranging dog population in India and managing them. But right now, the kind of solutions that most people come up with are very ad hoc. We also have a very strong um, the animal welfare side, which looks at dogs in a very different way. And I think the whole idea of animal welfare, when we look at it from India, technically, if a dog is attacking a wild animal, and the welfare of the wild animal is also is something that needs to be considered. But in general, if you look at animal welfare, a lot of it pertains mostly to domestic species and very strongly to dogs. So there are, and it's even when you look at the management of dogs, it's not a one single approach that can help you manage the situation. It has to be a multi-pronged approach in terms of managing dog populations. So even if you look at how human consumption levels have increased over a period of time, it has led to, the way we handle our waste. There are many different things. It's not just one thing that can help in managing populations of domestic dogs in India. So I mean, first and foremost, I think there has to be a change in some of the animal welfare board, the rules and the regulations that they put out. It's very important that all this while it's only been sterilization, but sterilization cannot take care of dog populations. It's not a feasible approach in terms of being the only approach to kind of um, manage dogs, because if you have to obtain a 70% decline in dog populations, almost 90% of the population has to be sterilized over a period of 13 to 18 years. Now, this is a very difficult proposition, and it's not something which is economically also feasible. India needs a very strong policy for dog ownership. We need to increase awareness, and there has to be people need to be educated about how do you manage dogs, how do you handle dogs. And even in terms of population management, it is not a single approach that needs to be taken care of, but somewhat like a multi-pronged approach. So it's not a single way in which it can be tackled. Definitely not a single way. So, and especially if you look at free-ranging dogs, particularly in protected areas, I mean, where they are actually going out and killing species which are critically endangered also. I think in some of those spaces, we really need to remove them from the system. How we want to remove them is definitely debatable, but they need to be removed from these sensitive zones for sure.